having this like huge network of people, right, is definitely contributing to their happiness. But also being so authentically themselves is a huge piece of it, and having such great communication and trust with other people. So I think the big takeaway for everybody is that there's all kinds of things that vanilla folks can learn from the BDSM community.
Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick. Welcome to this episode of Preconceived. This episode focused on BDSM, which is a very interesting sexual, not just sexual practice, but kind of a movement, an identity for certain people. I spoke with Alicia Walker, who's an author of a new book about BDSM. It's a really interesting conversation about something that's considered more of a fringe, closeted practice, but apparently is practiced by more people than you would expect. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Preconceived on BDSM with Alicia Walker. All right, Alicia Walker, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I said in the introduction that if you think sex is taboo, BDSM is probably, I don't know what the word would be to call it, extra taboo, something.
Yes.
Something more extreme than that. I am so naive to this topic, and I am to many of the topics on the show, which is why I love doing it. And I'm excited to learn about it. I'm excited for the audience to learn about it. I'm sure many people in the audience know more about it than I do. You've got an upcoming book about BDSM. So maybe start with, why did you write this book, and what's your kind of connection to BDSM that made you want to explore this topic more?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I generally research intimate sexual relationships, gender, sexual behavior, that sort of thing. And I specialize in closeted sexual behaviors, or just closeted behaviors really in general. So like the things that we do that we like don't want other people to know that we're doing, that's the kind of stuff I'm really interested in. And over the course of like, I don't know, about 9 months or so, I had 6 different students independently come up and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about studying BDSM?" And so the first 3, I was like, "No, I haven't." But by the 4th one, I started thinking maybe I should think about studying this. And so I have a co-author that I work with quite a bit, Ariel Cooperberg. So I reached out to her and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this BDSM study. Would you be interested?" Fully expecting her to say no, thank you. But to my shock, she was interested. So I said, okay, let's give it a whirl. I had no connection to BDSM, not at all. I mean, I was familiar with it, sure. I think the first time I heard about BDSM, uh, so back in the Stone Age, when I was a junior in college, I read about it in like, I think it was Cosmopolitan magazine or something. They did some kind of like
Expose.
interview, Yeah, yeah, yeah. They went to like a professional dungeon, or they had this dominatrix and the leather outfits and all this kind of stuff. And so I actually understood it as something not sexual at all, that people like did, businessmen on their lunch hour, like went and paid somebody, to dominate them basically. So that was pretty much my only real understanding of it until all these people started coming and talking to me about it. And then I was like, oh, okay. No, it's not just like this is your job and whatever. There are people who are doing this and including it in their sex life as well. And so I had a lot of students who were working for me in different capacities at that time. Um, and so I had a pretty large team of students who were helping me recruit for this study. And about half of them were involved in BDSM. And so so they really informed Ariel and I. And yeah, in terms of like, here's the language, here's kind of the lay of the land, here's how it works, so we didn't ask something stupid or offensive or just wrong. And so that was super super helpful. And then it was just a matter of figuring out where to find practitioners, which was a difficulty into itself. I mean, it's always hard, right? It's always hard to find people, but this study was particularly difficult. We had to kind of get past the gatekeeping on Reddit to like put it on Reddit, which was like a whole thing. And there's a website called FetLife. It's sort of like Facebook for kinksters, and we got permission from them to like advertise it on the site. They put up a profile with like an ad for the study. Yeah.
Very cool. I mean, it very much goes in line with your work of kind of looking at closeted things. How closeted is BDSM? And I guess when I ask that, I mean, is BDSM, some people do think of like dungeons where there's a bunch of
Sure.
people doing this together.
Yeah,
I know it's closeted, but is it closeted in a community sort of way where a lot of this happens in communal forums, or is a lot of this done like in individual settings, like two people are doing this together, but nobody knows that they're doing it? Or is it kind of like, no, there's a place where everybody's going and doing BDSM and engaging in these practices?
yes, to both of those things. It's all the things you just described. So there are what's called play parties, which is like there's a public play, but public's not really correct because like you and I couldn't just walk in. Okay.
We
But a
get
space
stopped
that
at
is
the door.
Yeah, we would definitely get stopped at the door, like you need a password or an invite or something like that. But it's public in the sense that it's not just in somebody's private home, right? And
Yeah.
so they hold these play parties. They even have dom cons, like a comic con, but for like BDSM. And so there are these spaces where people go, and there are groups and community and all that sort of thing, and people are actually engaging in BDSM. Some people are watching, some people are engaging, but then there are also people who said, I'm not part of any community deal at all. This is something I do in the privacy of my home. And then there are people sort of like in between that, like, yes, this is happening in the privacy of my home, but I remember one guy said he was a master and he had, I think, 3 slaves, I think. And he said they all wear collars, even out in public.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so they had to give up plane travel and they just now all travel by train because of the collars. I guess that makes it like hard to go through airport security, I guess. Um,
A little bit.
so like for him it's private, but then they're also signaling in public as well.
Yeah, and I'm guessing there's, the people who are out there in collars, which is more obvious. And then there's probably
Yeah.
people who, some of us know in our daily lives who we wouldn't
Oh, yeah.
expect, who are involved in this, where we'd be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Why would I? It's
Oh,
private.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, listen, you work with somebody who does BDSM, you live near somebody who does BDSM, you have friends who do it, you just don't know it because they're not talking to you about it because they know that you're not part of it. And so yeah, it's very secret, very clandestine. And I think that actually helps to build community for the people who are involved because it's like this secret that we're sharing with each other. We have this like secret language and signaling and experiences that we are sharing that we're not telling other people about, for sure. Absolutely. I mean, the students on my team,
Yeah,
and I said, hey, we're
50%.
in the study.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm in the study of BDSM. And when half of them were like, oh, I'm in BDSM. I mean, I had not that I needed to know, now that I routinely know about my students' sex lives because I don't. But no, I had no idea until they outed themselves to me and said, oh yeah, no, I'd be a great help because I actually do this. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Alicia, let's take a step back here. What is what? No. That's I asked you. What is BDSM? Because some people who don't know might just be thinking about like sex toys, and that's not really what this is. I'm sure that's involved in
No.
it. But what is BDSM? Because from the lay person's perspective, to me, it kind of seems like it's an ideology to an extent. Not necessarily an ideology, but there's a philosophical element of it where there's
Sure.
the submission and certain desires that you have and ways that you get it.
Yes.
there's a physicality, there's a sexuality. How would you explain BDSM to the person listening to this podcast who really doesn't know much about it?
Sure, absolutely. So BDSM is an acronym that stands for bondage, discipline, domination, sadism, and submission, and masochism. Okay. And those are like kind of the overall practices that are happening in within BDSM. But at its core, it's really a power exchange between two people, consensual power exchange that may or may not have a sexual element. Most of the people that we talk to, yes, BDSM was a sexual practice for them, but there was a small percent who made it very clear, like, this is not sexual for me whatsoever. And so, yeah, it has to do with some of the things that we think about all the time when we think of kink and BDSM, right? Like whips and chains and whatever. But it doesn't necessarily have to include those things. It could just include um, me telling you you can or can't do this because you've told me that you want me to tell you that, you know. um and it takes all kinds of different forms. People talk to us about such a wide range of practices that they engage in. So it can include all sorts of things. It technically includes things that a lot of people do, but wouldn't necessarily identify themselves as being a kinkster or being a BDSM practitioner. So like technically um slapping during sex, you know, some people slap each other on the butt during sex, right? Technically that's under the BDSM umbrella, right? But most people, lots of people do that and wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm a kinkster, I'm in BDSM."
And that's not really kind of what your book is talking about. You're not talking about the people who, not to minimize them or exclude them from BDSM, but that's
Right.
not that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about more extreme things or where, I mean, when I was looking online, like striking, flogging, uh,
Mhm.
kind of the costume element, the performative
Mhm.
element of it,
Mhm.
different than somebody who's kinda just, you know, slapping
And the rough
butt when
sex.
sex. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, everybody we talked to identified themselves as a BDSM practitioner. And they were talking about things well beyond just, oh, you know, we like to slap each other on the butt during sex. Yeah, people were talking about like pet play, you know, where I wear ears and a butt plug that has a tail on it and I, you know, bark and all that sort of thing. Or e-stim, you know, where one of us is like giving the other person like a mild electric shock, you know, or knife play or
So what would
cat play or you know
what would
all
knife
just all kinds of different things.
what would knife play look like, for example? What is that?
So it would involve a knife in our scene. So when two people are going to do BDSM, right? They sit down ahead of time and they negotiate. Okay. So I would say, okay, I want to have X, Y, and Z happen. And then you would say, okay, I'm into X, but I'm not into Y. We're not going to do that. So we would sit down and talk through this. These are the things I want, and these are the things I'm willing to do or not willing to do. And that might mean that we don't end up doing BDSM together because our desires don't match up. But let's say they match up, right? We basically, I mean, we don't write a script, but we basically write a script. Like I want this to happen, and then I want this to happen. I want this to happen, and so that's called a scene. And so within that scene, we would have a knife that we were integrating into our play. And it may just mean that I'm just like laying the blade against your skin or different body parts or something. It could mean that I'm like kind of rubbing the edge a little. Some people actually do blood play where they actually do pierce the skin and there's some blood. Yeah, there's all kinds of different practices, like much more than I had ever had any concept of before running the study, for sure.
When developing that scene, as you call it, what are some of the
Mhm.
most common desires, for example, that would be laid out?
Oh gosh, I don't even know if that's a question I can really answer because, like I said, the play is so varied. I mean, people reported, I think, more than 100 different practices. There are just so many different things. But I don't want to say this is the most common, but like just an example. Let's just say an example.
Yeah,
So
just to give
maybe
people a flavor.
sure, sure. So let's say I'm a dom and you come to me and you say, okay, I want you to tie me up with my hands behind my back, and I want my legs cuffed together with handcuffs or not hand leg restraints. And I want you to tell me I'm a sissy boy, and say denigrating things about my body. And then I want you to get the flogger out, and I want you to hit me, we would practice before the scene. Like, you want me to hit you this hard? Is that too hard? Is that too soft? We would negotiate a safe word. So instead of saying stop, that if you actually wanted the person to stop, you would have some kind of safe word. Because that might be part of the fun, is saying stop, but you don't actually really mean to stop. And so we'd negotiate some kind of safe word ahead of time. If there was going to be some sexual activity as part of that, we would negotiate that as well. Yeah, that sort of thing.
And how often is the sexual activity a part of it?
So most of the people we talk to when they do BDSM, there is a sexual uh, aspect to it. There's a sexual activity as part of what's going on. Yeah.
How do you establish when you're creating that scene who is in the dominant role, who's in the submissive role? Is that something where typically, I don't know if there's payments involved, but is that typically something where somebody who wants to be in the submissive role would go and seek out somebody who's willing to dominate them? For some reason, that's what I think of. Maybe that's because
Mhm.
that's what entertainment and media portrays.
Yeah. So people have roles within BDSM, right? And so people identify as certain roles, right? So somebody's like, I'm a dom, or I'm a master, I'm a slave, or I'm a submissive, or I'm a bottom, or I'm a little girl, or I'm whatever it is, right? And that's the role that they play in the scene. So if you are a sub, then you're going to seek out somebody who is dominant to do the scene with you, and vice versa. There are some people who identify as something called a switch, which just means that they might be dominant or submissive depending on the scene, their mood, who they're playing with, etc. But that was less common. It was less common for folks to be a switch. It was more common for folks to be very squarely in one identity or the other.
I think the main question for me as I think about this is why? Like, what do people get out of this, right? And that's
Hmm.
not meant as a denigrating question. It's meant as a,
Hmm.
this is
Sure.
something that some people view as a deviant activity, which I think is a
Oh yeah.
very stigmatized word, but
Sure.
it's a fair question to ask. There's a lot of different elements in BDSM that you would say, why would somebody want this? Are they doing it for an emotional reason? Are they doing it because it enhances sexual pleasure? What's behind this? And I imagine there's many different answers for different people, but
Sure.
if you could maybe touch on some of the reasons why people partake in this kind of activity.
Sure. Absolutely. And if you're somebody that this isn't something that appeals to you, you do want to know why, right? Um, so it's very counter to how I see sexual activity. I don't see it as a power exchange. And so that was something that I was also, like, how did you come to this place? Like, why is this something that you want to do, basically? And there's not a super slick, easy answer, but the short version of the answer is that if you're somebody who's into BDSM, you want something different out of what's happening than what somebody so somebody who's not into BDSM, they would call us vanilla. Okay. You want something that vanilla sex is just not going to give you. There's an emotional release that they talk about that happens for them when they're doing BDSM things that does not happen when they're doing vanilla activities. For them, they don't find vanilla activities intense enough. It just a lot of them talked about finding just straight vanilla sexual activity as like boring. Some of them thought it was gross. Most of them just talked about it just was just really unfulfilling, that they had tried. A lot of people had like went into BDSM and then like tried to kind of not be BDSM. Like say they met somebody who was not into that and they were really into that person. So they're like, okay, I'm gonna try to give this up because I want to be with this person. And that had really not worked out for them, because they just felt like something was missing. And so that's the best explanation that folks really could give me, was that this is tapping into something that if you're a person who doesn't need this, there's no way you and I are ever going to be able to fully understand it. But it's something that they need, that vanilla people just don't need. But it has to do with like intensity and emotional release and sort of like reaching this different level of connection with this other person that they feel like they can't do through vanilla activity.
It's funny. We all love being called vanilla, right?
Okay, hey, I like vanilla. Vanilla's good.
I'm kidding. I'm
Smells
kidding.
good, tastes good.
I had a conversation with somebody recently where they called someone vanilla, and I was like, you know what? I don't think anybody is really vanilla. I feel like the word vanilla is kind of a cop out. You just don't know somebody well enough. But anyhow,
Right.
one of the striking themes in your book is
You could be a rich vanilla though, you know.
I love vanilla.
Madagascar vanilla. Yeah, come on.
100%. One of the striking themes in your book is, how you said, how BDSM kind of does serve as this release valve for people's emotional lives. Can you expand on that a bit? Does that attract a certain kind of person who maybe does feel repressed, not necessarily in their sexual lives, but in their life in general, that then maybe leads them to say, well, I could maybe have that release in my sexual life to kind of compensate for my normal non-BDSM life. From the people you interviewed
Sure.
and spoke to, did you find a theme in the kinds of people who identified as BDSM?
I didn't necessarily find a theme in terms of the type of person. Like I said, they came from all walks of life. Like you definitely know people who do BDSM. You just don't know that about them. I know a lot of people, but I'm a sex researcher, so people tell me things. And Ariel has said that since the book has come out, a lot of people have come out as BDSM. But typically, right, that's something not somebody would tell you. But in terms of that emotional release, yes, that came up again and again. People talked about, I remember one woman said she was a Dom, and she said, sometimes you just want to kick people. And this is a place where I can kick people because that person wants to be kicked. And she was like, you know what I'm talking about? I do not. So again, we're talking about people that need something beyond what you and I need. But that came up a lot. People just talking about their participation, release something for them that vanilla activity just really didn't. There were quite a few men actually who talked about having this like emotional release in BDSM, where it created this space where they felt like they could have emotions that in their non BDSM life they weren't like allowed to have. So for example, crying, or just having emotion in general. A lot of them talked about like, I feel like I have to be this like really stoic, non-emotional person out in the world, and I can come into this BDSM space, into the scene, and have this like big emotional release that there isn't like another space for me to do that. And so that came up quite a bit too. But yeah, pretty much everybody I talked to talked about how it's a big emotional release for them.
Was there a big difference between men and women in terms of which roles they took on? I'm picturing the men being in the more submissive roles. Is that accurate, or is it pretty equal?
That was kind of my impression as well. I think that's just like media. I think media presents that a lot.
Totally.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's where we're kind of getting that from. But that's not what we found. And other research backs this up as well, that BDSM does tend to run along gender lines. And actually, the men I talked to who are submissive talked a lot about gender as well, and said that, first of all, there's stigma sometimes even within, or they feel anyway, within the BDSM world towards them because they're men who are subs, which is like unusual to start with. And then they talked about how few female doms there were, that it was like difficult to find a female dom. Matter of fact, this was a thing that kept happening in the interviews, and I remember saying to Ariel, like, "I don't even know what to do with this," but, be interviewing a man who was a sub, we get to the end of the interview, and they would say, "I can just tell from the way that you communicate that you're a really dominant personality, and have you ever thought about being a dominatrix? And, I'd like to have a dom." And I was like, "Yeah, no, I have not, I
I'm good.
I do get told a lot that I have a dominating personality, but no, I have not thought about." But, I think that speaks to, like, how desperate they are to find, appropriate partners, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do, I think, and I want I don't wanna pretend like I fully get it. Um,
That's okay.
no, but I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to understand it, and I wanna get to a couple core questions for me about some of the specifics. So masochism,
Okay.
is the tendency to derive pleasure, especially sexual gratification from one's own pain or humiliation. So walk
Yes.
me through, aside from the kind of umbrella idea of emotional release. Like, why would someone derive pleasure from humiliation? Because I think that's a question that a lot of people probably listening are trying to understand. Why would somebody want to be called a sissy? Why would somebody want to feel humiliated? How would they explain that feeling? And is there insight, did you find when speaking with a lot of these people, acknowledging that I could understand why somebody wouldn't get why I would want to be called a sissy? Um,
Right.
but what was kind of the general reason why? Because that for me is hard to understand.
Yeah, so the big unifying thread between the men I talked to, who were submissives, was that they believed that they had small penises, and they believed that because of that, they were undesirable partners for women, and that anybody who saw them with their pants down would just think that they were ridiculous looking. And so, I mean, I think some of it is got to be tangled up in, some early, like, priming, and porn watching, and just our society's obsession, with size. So I think for them at least, and that was not every single male sub that I talked to, but that was quite a few of them. It came up pretty often actually in those interviews. So I think for them, that's kind of bound up in that. And so the people who really wanted someone to, like, humiliate them and say, like, awful things about them, they specifically wanted someone to say, like, "You're a sissy boy and you have a small penis, and who would want to have sex with that?" And basically say to them the things that I guess is on the mental tape in their head that's being, we all have this
Like
internal,
validating some of their biggest fears in a way.
yeah, basically, yeah, and somehow that provides, a release for them. Now, I'm like you, I would not like it if someone were saying all the things that are my secret fears about myself. I would not like that at all, and I would not find release in that. That would make me very upset. But for whatever reason, um, folks who are into BDSM and into submission and into humiliation specifically, because certainly not everyone who's a sub is necessarily into humiliation. But among this group of people that I'm talking about, for them, that provided an important release, and they really, really enjoyed that. And they very much felt like they needed it, and were pretty desperate, to find someone to do that for them.
I'm trying to parallel that in my mind to just general society, and I guess in society, there's often a validation of positive things, right? And there's a validation
Sure.
of the opposite of what somebody's saying. Somebody might be saying negative things about themselves. "Oh, I'm not so smart. I'm not so good looking." And the natural inclination for other people would be to pick them up and say, "No, no, no, you are. You're
Right.
very not you have a big penis," because because they don't know, but no, you are X,
Exactly.
Y, and Z. And maybe there is some sort of release, as you said, of I don't want to hear this kind of crap. I just want somebody to tell me what it is. And there is some release in validation of the truth, and I guess what they view as authenticity. Even it's like I can face the harsh truths. I don't need someone to tell me uh, the sugar-coated version of it. I don't know. I'm talking out loud because I don't understand, but I'm trying to get in the head of that.
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something. And I think we take it a step further. If I'm in the scene with someone who's consented to be in the scene with me, who is doing the scene with me because this is something they enjoy doing, then there's value in what I bring. Even if all these things in my head are true, there's
Mm.
still value that I'm bringing to the scene because this person wants someone like that to enact this scene with, right? And so,
Like this Dom
if
is
all these
getting
things are true,
pleasure.
yeah,
This
yeah, yeah,
Dom is
yeah,
getting
yeah.
pleasure from me saying this and from me being a sub. So
Yes,
I'm actually exactly like you said, like bringing value here to the scene because
yes.
I'm one of the two characters that's needed.
Yeah, and I'm bringing value just as I am. Whereas out in the world, I feel like I need to mask this. I need to hide this about myself. I'm going to try to act more masculine because I think I'm a sissy boy and I don't want other people to know that about me. But here in this space, I'm free to be the sissy boy that I think I am, and I'm free to bring this body that I think is subpar. And someone's reveling in who I actually really am. And so that is a space where I'm fully being myself and I can relax. Whereas out in the world, I'm having to, walk around with all this imposter syndrome and like constantly pretending that I'm something that I believe that I'm not.
I want to shift to the other perspective of the Dom
Sure.
and sadism.
Hmm.
So sadism is conversely the tendency to derive pleasure, especially sexual gratification, from inflicting pain, suffering, or humiliation on others. So
Correct.
on the surface, granted this is all consensual, so and I'm not trying to judge, but we're also trying to have an honest conversation, understand. On the surface, that doesn't sound so good, right? Like the idea of
Right.
I get joy out of hurting somebody. And this is the
Sure.
aspect of BDSM where I could see people saying, well, I'm sure there's a lot of elements, so maybe not just this aspect, but where somebody could say, why is it a good thing to have a situation where you're kind of encouraged to kind of be mean to somebody, even if they're asking you to do it? Not just be mean, but to hurt them, to potentially flog them, electrostimulation. Is that
Hmm.
something that we should be kind of encouraging? Well, before we get to that, as I'm talking, my question is changing because I'm thinking out loud. I can
That's
understand.
okay.
We all have urges, right? And I mean, I think everybody has had an urge to do something bad to someone else. I think it would be naive to say that not necessarily to this extent, but we've all had bad urges, right?
Sure. Sure.
Usually
Sure.
though, in society, on the one hand, yes, you could say it's a good thing to follow your urges because that's a release, and maybe that's a release that leads to gratification and maybe better emotional understanding of oneself. On the other hand, most of us put those in check and we rein them in because we realize, you know what? There's certain urges in the human condition that are best tamed.
Correct.
How do people in the BDSM community square that? Or do they even try to square that?
So I think that's the beauty of the community. So you tapped onto something really important earlier about the consent piece, and everybody that I interviewed was really wanted me to understand that consent is the cornerstone of BDSM. If you don't have consent, this is all just abuse, right? And so if you're somebody who is like, I get gratified by humiliating someone, inflicting physical harm on them, but I I don't want to do that to somebody that doesn't want it, right? It's a relief to find somebody that wants to be on the receiving end of what it is I want to do, right?
Mm.
Um, and and I think there's a big distinction to be made between someone like that versus someone who part of what is going on for them is that they want to do something non-consensually to someone, right? Those are like really, really different things. And so, yeah, I think that's a big piece of the community is folks being able to authentically be themselves, to say to someone else, this is something that I want to do. This is something that I desire, that I'm not supposed to desire, that if I said this out in the world and in a room full of people, I would be shunned and vilified and criticized and whatever. And here's this whole group of people who not only accept me and tolerate me, they celebrate me and they say, hey, this is great because you know what? I want someone to do that to me. So that's terrific. And so that's really the biggest piece of all this is that you have these complementary roles that people are playing and they're finding, their match in someone else that wants what the other person wants. I don't know if what I just said makes sense,
It,
but
it, it you know it does make total sense.
okay, good.
Alicia, I'm
Good.
curious of the people you saw. How much of this is couples who are doing this? How much of this is maybe cheating, where somebody is doing this outside of their relationship and their partner doesn't know? How much of this is not cheating, but it's outside of their committed relationship and their partner just accepts my partner's into this, I'm not, and they're going to do it? I know there's a lot of things in that question, but I guess I'm saying,
Yeah.
is there a lot of variety in terms of the types of romantic relationships these people are in?
Um, so there are a lot of couples, right? Um, Folks who it just works out or they couple up because they're complementary roles or
Mhm.
whatever. And then there's a lot of folks who are single, but they have various BDSM partners, you know. There's a lot of that as well. There wasn't a lot of cheating. There were a few people who said, I was married to someone, I found BDSM, I wanted to do it. My spouse was not into it. And so I either got permission to do that on my own or I cheated. But if they cheated very quickly, they just walked away from the relationship because they knew that they wanted to do BDSM. They wanted to be involved in the community and that was something that they wanted to do and that they were never going to be able to just like go back to vanilla stuff. And so there wasn't a lot of the cheating aspect. There was a few, but very small group of folks who were married to somebody who was not into BDSM, and they were doing BDSM sort of solo apart from the partner.
Mhm.
Although some people said that had originally been their situation, but then that relationship just ended and they ended up in a BDSM. Because another thing that we heard from folks was that over time, their entire friend group, their entire social network was actually people in BDSM. So I feel like even if somebody started by cheating or started by, this is something I'm going to do without my spouse with their permission, um, they just get so deep into the community that I think they just end up that their intimate relationships are other BDSM folks.
Yeah, which makes sense when you're entrenched in a community like that.
Yeah,
Alicia, what are some of the takeaways you took away from this experience, from your research and writing this book? And sometimes I think we try to overly extrapolate, okay, how does this relate to kind of the average person? You know, what can the average person take away from this or potentially learn? And sometimes that's a good thing. And sometimes I think maybe the lesson is not a lesson that is extrapolated to the average person, and it's just and it's just this is a thing that occurs in society.
yeah,
Interesting. We can observe it. We can research it. I'm not taking much away, but what's your takeaway, if there was one, that maybe was a lesson for you, or that you felt like the average Joe or Jane could take away from this?
sure. Yeah. So I'll be honest, when I got started, I thought it was going to be the latter situation, whereas like I was just going to research this thing that happens in society and just kind of report on it and like here it is and here you go. Um, but when we started writing the book, um, I told Ariel, I said, I don't really know what this is about. I said, but the big thing that every single person that I talked to had in common was that every single person I interviewed was really happy, which is pretty unusual. I don't think I've ever interviewed an entire group of people before where every single person was happy. And
Yeah.
then if you walk it further and think about the fact that BDSM is so stigmatized, it's even more surprising that everybody was so happy, right? And so we started thinking about that, like, okay, so what is that about? What's going on there? Because it can't just be, oh, they're having amazing sex because they're having BDSM sex, because I've certainly interviewed people who are sexually fulfilled before. Okay, so that's not what it is. And so as we dug in, we started realizing that BDSM provides so much structure that contributes to people's happiness. So it's not like the specific acts of BDSM are what's making them happy, although I'm sure that's contributing since that's something they enjoy doing. But you and me taking up BDSM is not going to make us happy, right? That's not the answer. But having such a big community, like some of these people, they have holidays with like 30 people, okay? They hang out with like 30 people to do game night. We're in a world where loneliness is an epidemic, right? I was honestly very jealous of that aspect of their lives. I had to move for my job in academia. I am living in a part of the country where I didn't know anybody when I moved here. And I mean, I have lots of friends, but they're not local to me. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
I wanted to have a party for myself for getting tenure, and I realized I don't have
Well, congrats on getting tenure.
space. Um,
You have a
so
preconceived notion.
having this like huge network of people, right, is definitely contributing to their happiness. But also being so authentically themselves is a huge piece of it, and having such great communication and trust with other people. So I think the big takeaway for everybody is that there's all kinds of things that vanilla folks can learn from the BDSM community that can improve our lives without us having to pick up. Because if you're not into BDSM, trying BDSM is not that's not going to make you happy. That's going to make you uncomfortable, right? But there's certainly things that we can learn, which is what our book is about. For me personally, I think the big takeaway for me was um, not only authentically being yourself, but asking for what you want, being clear with yourself about what you want, and asking clearly for what you want. If you think about vanilla intimate relationships, who do you know who's sitting down and having a conversation before you get intimate and saying, okay, this is what I like to have happen when I have sex, and this is how often I want to have sex, and this is what I want it to look like, and this is what I want to have we don't have those kinds of conversations, right? And these people are having these like really explicit conversations. This is what I want. Can you do it? Can you not do it? You can't do it. Okay, no worries. Thanks for playing. No judgment, but I'm going to go find somebody who can, right? And I think that is something that is, I think, a big takeaway from the book, and not just in the sexual realm, but just in life in general, right? If you're really super honest and authentic with yourself about what it is that you want, and you ask for that very clearly, I think that's a really powerful thing that not enough of us are doing. And I think that the society we live in really doesn't encourage us to do that.
Yeah, so a lot of great stuff there. So community, authenticity of being yourself, asking what you want, and I was gonna say, is this something that you would say more people should incorporate into their sex lives to a minor degree? And my sense is that you're saying probably not in terms of specific BDSM, but the idea of why not be more explicit in your
Yes.
quote unquote vanilla sexual relationship about this is what I want, this is what I don't want. Because a lot of couples, I imagine, probably don't have those conversations because they're awkward. And
Right.
even the most intimate of couples may not have those conversations. And what you can learn from this is maybe BDSM is not for you. That's a different beast, so to speak. But that directness about asking what you want, like you said, in your sex life and in your real life. So I think those are really, really great lessons.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not at all advocating that people take up scat play or take up flogging each other or take up in any of the BDSM practices. But I do think we should absolutely be having more authentic, direct conversations about what we want, what we need, and what what we're willing to do or not willing to do. And yeah, I think we're not having those conversations because it is awkward. But think about how awkward these BDSM conversations really could be, right? How awkward it could be for someone to say, "Hey, I want you to call me a sissy boy and tell me my penis is too small." I mean, that's a really awkward conversation. If they can have those conversations, surely to goodness, the rest of us can come to a place where we can have awkward conversations as well, right?
And the other thing you said was kind of you were shocked by how happy they were and kind of that
Oh yeah.
relationship between happiness and embracing stigma. And preconceived, I mean, a lot of this show is about tackling topics that have stigma associated with them, whether they're political, whether they are just choices that we make in our lives that are unconventional and having the freedom to do that or discuss them. And I think that there is that level of happiness just by not by being a rebel, but by embracing the idea of an alternative path, whether you want to call it stigma or whatever you want to call it, but by embracing the idea of I don't just need to follow the status quo. I can explore other things, and maybe there's a happiness that's derived merely from the notion that one says, "Yeah, I did that. I explored another opportunity that isn't so well laid in front of me."
Yeah, and I think just fully accepting yourself. These folks talked about having, or a lot of people anyway, having kind of a struggle with accepting, like, what kind of person am I that I want to flog people? What kind of person am I that I want to kick people? What kind of
Mhm.
person am I that I want to be called a sissy boy? And so they had to come to this place of like accepting themselves and being honest that this is something that I want, right? Well, just because folks are vanilla doesn't mean that they're not struggling to accept something. Right? We all have something about ourselves that we struggle to accept or feel that we shouldn't be this way, that we should be something different, something more, something better. And so I think there's a lot of power in just fully accepting yourself and finding your community of folks who fully accept you, not just tolerate you, but fully accept you, embrace you, and celebrate you. And so I think that is definitely something to take away in terms of happiness, and that there's a lot of power in that.
Well, Alicia, this is one of the more fascinating conversations I've had. I'm definitely gonna leave. I usually leave podcast episodes thinking, I wish I asked that. I wish I asked that." I'm sure I'm gonna have tons of questions, and this is gonna get my mind thinking, right? Because for me,
Yeah.
probably the most interesting part of our conversation was when we were kind of dissecting, okay, like what is in the frame of mind of the dom and the sub and what they're actually
Yeah.
getting out of this, and kind of to get, I mean, you know way more than I do. You wrote a book on it and you did the research, but a lot of the things you said made me question to myself, like, okay, how can I get inside that person's mind, right? Especially because you're not saying these people are deviants. You're saying I probably know, not probably, I do know a lot of these people.
Oh yeah,
So
you do.
what's going into their heads? Anyway, it was such a fascinating conversation. Um, Tell us a little bit about your book, Bound by BDSM: Unexpected Lessons for Building a Happier Life, that you co-authored with Ariel Cooperberg. Where can people learn more about that, and what can they expect when they read that book?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can buy it anywhere you buy books. It's there's been like a little 20% sale going on from the publisher. So you may want to check there first if you like to get a discount. I certainly like to get a discount.
Who doesn't?
It's a really conversational book. It's written not for academics, it's written for just the average person. It's actually written for vanilla folks, for people who don't have any interest in BDSM, to say, here's what you can take away from BDSM, not the whips and the chains and the flogs, but the other pieces, the non BDSM practices that you can take away to have a happier life. And it's it's uh, it's humorous and it's conversational, and I'm told that it's easy to read. So hopefully, folks agree with that.
Well, awesome. Alicia Walker, author of Bound by BDSM. Thank you so much for joining me on Preconceived.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Have a great day.